Not always a cold beer in Germany.
Salud.
Cheers.
Oh.
Thanks for this.
Yeah, it's fun. It's good. It's good stuff. I almost want to change. No, I'm not doing it.
Do it.
No. But no, I like that conversation. Like, I think there is a I think what we don't do as leaders is we don't have our plan completed. I'm going through something right now where I just wrote what I think is probably the best script I've ever written. Give it to folks. People love it. I think it's really good. It's a short. It's like 34 pages. Talked to my buddy named Frank Coker. He's won Game of the Year a couple of times. He's like a big timer. I love him to death. He's worked on early computer stuff, video games, board games, now getting into children's books. He's like Gambit, but he completes a process. And he's like a guy who does everything fully. And I'm sitting there in his pool in Chapel Hill talking to him about this, and he's like, "Yeah, I like that. I liked a lot. I think it's like evolution in your writing." You know, like he's like Stephen King. It's like apparently his process is he'll take a stack of papers, write the first draft, and then he'll take that piece of paper, move it to the right, grab another stack, write a second draft. Take that, put it over there, write a third draft. And I'm really hesitant to do that because I'm like, I think, when I write, it's like Jay-Z rapping. It's like one and done. I'm good. I'm gone. But I think the problem is the artists in us believe in this idea, this ephemeral nature, this idea of, hey, it's all coming from the spiritual side. So if you try to tap it again, it's not the same. It's not as good. Take two can never be as good as take one. There's a beauty in raw. We love alcohol. We love drugs. All that type of stuff. We like that feeling, right? There's a lot going on. Hopefully this mic's still getting this. But anyway,
yeah,
it's we like this feeling, and I think that, and you and I have talked about this before. Last time we talked years ago on camera, it was this idea of like I called it like the scientific method. Observation, hypothesis, all that stuff goes into it. And I think as artists, we don't do that. But what I'm starting to understand as a business person is that you have to have so many different drafts that by the time you come to someone, it's like you and I were just talking about, by the time I go to any member of my team, this is well thought out. Like, yes, like they can like add something to it. Yes, we can take it to the next level together. But the first draft is only the first draft. What's that? Put it back on.
So I was thinking about the kind of science of it all conversation we had a few years ago, and that's still very much true or accurate, I'll say. But I think what I'm also finding is that it's this aspect of architecture, of building.
Yeah, okay.
Of creating framework that was built to support. And that, in my experience, nearly 20 years now, has been one of the most influential aspects of like whether a project is successful or not. And by successful, I mean, did it achieve an alignment with the original vision or essence of the original vision and the final manifestation, or the manifestation that then goes on tour, and of course a new life begins there, another thing. But what is the framework of the infrastructure and the architecture of what you're building, the content you're finding a home for, and this is across genre. When we take a framework and attempt to stuff an idea into it, that framework may or may not be big enough or aligned enough in terms of what that content is asking for or needs. And to, of course, the old adage or cliche, trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I mean, that ultimately, any of these concepts that I've been running up against, like, you know, more scientific methods of like having a hypothesis, you know, a vision can still be an idea in terms of it will change, you know, the ultimate picture of what becomes, but you still have you start with one.
Right. And I wonder if you agree with this. I think you're saying it. I'm a big fan of active listening now. So
Yeah.
again, communication really matters. The fact, like, all right, I tell, as someone who manages people, you manage people too. I used to always get really mad at employees. Like, I told you to do something, you didn't do it. But then I recently realized my flaw was I told you what to do, you shook your head, and then you went off and did it. Now, I never checked to make sure that you actually knew exactly what I wanted you to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like now with people, I'm like, all right, what did you hear me say? What are the steps I need you to do? And so same thing here. I mean, I think it's very important. You started off talking about the goal. It's super important to have the goal. It's like, what is it that we're here for? Everyone here needs to understand what we're doing. Like whether it's there's a dollar value that we're trying to make, whether it's getting a piece on stage, whether it's getting someone something for their portfolio. It's like you have to first of all understand what that is. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, to have a sense of to have in your imagination what, you know, what you're trying to achieve. Yeah, I think there are.
We're in downtown Durham. There is a train. It's probably going to Charlotte or someplace. Thank you for that. Anyway, so
Running
yeah,
from the scene.
what were you saying? Infrastructure.
Yeah, and the importance of having a vision to begin with, because without it, it's as if you were working on 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle with no image to compare, not for the sake of value, but for the sake of accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
And half the puzzle pieces are upside down. You know, you've got to still figure out which are your edges. You know, like like you can get there, but the process becomes so much more heinous, for lack of a better word. I mean, like, I think that's another kind of key takeaway I hope to give artists is it doesn't have to be this frustrating.
Yeah, right.
Because when you understand the vision you are seeking to achieve, experimentation can 100% be a part of that process. Exploration, it will shift that vision. But that you have something to start with, you can start to align your actions and processes towards working towards it more efficiently. And that actually doesn't take away from your artistic process. I think a lot of artists get hung up on, if I name what it is, I haven't given myself the space to explore what it could be.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're doing is you're giving yourself this time and space to refine, and you're actually buying yourself more time with your craft than the idiocy of an inefficient process.
Which again, but we've been sold on this lie that the inefficient process is the process.
Correct.
Like
Correct.
we've all, like, everyone thinks that art is. Yeah, it's not. It's not. I mean, like, it's like, again, what I love about our conversations, as well as a really good buddy of mine, Chris Everett, is like we all talk about business. And I think that's probably one of the biggest changes with me over the past, I guess, since like I started making films like at 18. So you start looking at, like, what am I doing this for? Like, what is this process? But I also think it goes back to what you're saying. Like, what is it that you're trying to be? Like, if someone comes to you and like, I need help, right? Which is like one of the most flattering things and one of the most probably frustrating things. Because every artist will come to you and say, "Oh, I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to do," and you're like, "Oh, okay, this is cool. Oh, great. I'd love to help you." But then I think the older we get, the more mature we get in our craft, we start like these questions. Almost just like investors have questions like, "Oh, okay, before I give you my money, or in our case, before I give you my time, where are you in this process?
My first question for artists is why.
Mm.
I go back to that. I mean, again, these fundamental things, like it really is in these simple concepts and kind of like principles, if you will. I have an idea. I want to do this thing. It came to me in a vision. I was thinking the other day, why?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Why? Because if where we are spending our time, our energy, and our resources, our skill sets, our crafts, our visions, is not for a purpose larger than ourselves and our own expression. While these things can be beautiful and cool to experience, or even moving to experience, and profound to experience, if we could be more deliberate and intentional and conscious and understanding its ultimately purpose. Why do you want to pursue making this vision happen? Why is this important to you? Why is this important now? And I think ultimately all of this is kind of begins at the threshold of understanding that where I come into play and when artists come to me, it's when you've crossed that moment or arrived at the intersection of, I want the public to experience this. That's the kind of like primary foundation that all of this thinking rests on. Is I have a vision, I have an idea, I have a pull. I have to get this out of me. I don't know what this is. I'm seeing this thing and I have to, create it literally when it's for the public. And that's why becomes so important, because what are you speaking to? We are ourselves consumers just as our audience members are. It's a reality we live within. So why should you spend your time, energy, effort, and resources? Why should they spend their time, energy, effort, and resources to experiencing? And the more you can clarify that, the more you can be conscious of the process of figuring that out, I think the more aligned and therefore successful the ultimate result.
Yeah, I think so much that you said is huge. I have conversations with other artists, which is, why do we make this stuff?
Yeah.
And, and it ultimately boils down to the second part, what you're saying. Why do we show it to the public? And that's crazy, right? It's actually really big. Like, I remember like you had this series that you were doing for a while. It was like you and your driveway around your house, like doing dances, right? And it's like, no one needs to see this, but maybe someone needs to see it. And it's one of those things of, and as someone who makes films, someone who writes, it's like, this could just be for me.
Yeah.
But I'm ultimately putting it out there. I always say I make my work for like 17-year-old Michael Washington, who's like trying to watch film, trying to see stuff, and really see himself out there for multiple reasons, right? It's just, I think I'm trying to create for those people, that person.
Yeah.
Like, okay, hey, maybe you might dig this. I also find that to be a very troubling, again, like I just finished this movie called Buck, and it's like, it's pretty dang intense, and it's like, you think about what you're putting out into the world and why you're doing it and who is going to find this and what they're going to interpret from it. But on that other scale of it, success. How do you initially, like, how do you figure out what you want success to be for yourself, for the people you're helping? Like, what is success? What's that formula?
Yeah. Success, I think, is a loaded and overused word. I was just speaking recently. I think success is a practice. I think every element of life is a practice.
I agree with that.
Any way you slice, dice it,
Yeah.
Every angle. And it's an unfolding. So, where I may have described success as a young dancer, late teens, early 20s, success really looked like auditioning and getting into a dance company that had a touring schedule. Why? Because then I could reach audiences, on a large scale and live this life of expression. And I was addicted to the discipline of training. I just loved every single aspect of it. There was a passion that was like, yes, like this lifestyle, getting to live and breathe that would be successful. And of course, limitations in terms of physically of like, and this is another moment of, or maybe an early moment of arriving to this idea of like, is the container meant to fit the content within? Me attempting to literally conform and like assimilate essentially into dance companies that already existed, where I would have had to take myself, it wasn't aligned with my purpose. And, life sends you on a journey, and arriving to today where success is a practice, and that dance company that is performing on a tour may be something that a company that I'm creating. I don't know if I'll actually do that, but like this unfolding of listening to, and this is where the measurement of like having the vision and like this kind of comparison of accuracy comes into play of like having a vision, making an action, assessing, taking that time to pause and assess. How did that feel? Was it aligned? Was it not aligned? Something doesn't feel right. Well, that just like lightning just struck, and that was it. It was take one. It might have been take 12 because the practice of craft, refinement exists. And, sometimes it gets there right at the last take. But it's this unfolding of listening. And ultimately, I think, if there were definable moments of like, that was a successful project, or like that night was successful, this one wasn't, is really, it's this kind of inventory of alignment of like what connected and what didn't. And the more connections found, I think, let's call it, the more successful something seems.
So to me, it sounds like you're talking a little bit about analysis.
Yeah, that's such a huge part.
And it's like to make a segue, because I'm really good at that. You're writing a book right now.
Yeah.
Which is like probably the compendium, to use a word I learned, thanks to Boy Meets World. Thank you, Eric Matthews. A compendium of all your knowledge. Talk about the book. Talk about what you're doing with that, why you're writing it, and like, because it's funny. Because to me, I don't want to take too much away from you, but you started this journey with Proxemic years ago, like 5-6 years ago, ish.
Longer.
Yeah. So
full time, almost 2 years.
Yeah, but like, the last time we chatted, which was 2020, I want to say.
Yeah.
Deep in the heart of the pandemic, we were not this close back then.
Yeah.
You were just like starting this process. Now you have collected enough to do a book. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm writing a book. It's called Building a Vision: Principles to Producing.
Nice, great title.
It's still, still throwing the spaghetti noodle to the wall, seeing where it sticks. It's a practical guide to creating.
Yeah.
Again, it starts this me leaning into acknowledging, speaking of purpose, my purpose of helping make art happen. Being this bridge between audiences and art and artist work, artists and venues and kind of other collaborators. It begins at the place an artist decides they want the public to experience their work. And it was a really powerful moment to clarify that purpose, because what I've always wanted to write for some reason. I don't consider myself a writer, but I am a wordsmith. I would say I find great joy in literally sensing a feeling or sensing what I'm trying to communicate, and like just literally plucking words to formulate it without um, conforming necessarily to grammar or what people are used to hearing, connecting words, you know. Um, but the idea, I knew I wanted to write a book. It was probably 10 years ago. And what I initially set out on was imagining that it was going to be a compilation of artist interviews of independent artists, how they were making it work. And I still think that's a great idea. And, hopefully one day there will be a form of bringing that to life. But what I started refining, the more I kind of explored these conversations with artists and some more informal interviews, is that what I was hearing is that some sort of framework and guidelines or principles, a place to have access information. Of course, we can Google all day, but like something tangible that you can pick up and put back down, that guided an artist through the process of creating for the public. Having an idea of wanting to bring something to the public to experience. And it hasn't been written down yet. Why? Because it's the 21st century and we are in a playground that institutions are, questioning just as much as the independent artists, what we might call street life in terms of the artistic field. Academic centers, higher education are asking themselves, how do we operate in a 21st century environment, especially post-pandemic? So kind of this active listening, this idea of wanting to communicate something, having a conversation about it, and then essentially asking this entity, this other opposite end of the conversation, to repeat back and to reflect on what they gathered. And what I gathered is artists don't necessarily, there are resources the world over for artists to talk to each other about their experiences and creating their work, both for themselves and for audiences. Cool. Perfect. Yes, we need that. We need those. That is a part of the ecosystem. But where's the framework of sharing with artists that A, they're not alone, and B, they don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time?
Which is crazy.
Which is wild to imagine.
Yeah.
Because we also know that none of this is necessarily formulaic. Because based on the vision, context is everything. That creation process may require some deviation from some previous process or workflow. I saw it a lot in institutions, and I see it now too, where there's an artistic presenter, has a way they've chosen artists before, bring in shows. Their departments have a workflow process that they use to kind of carry the project through, and then it happens. As institutions are now pivoting to figure out how to program in a different way, in a more expansive way, a more inclusive way. What even they are forgetting is that workflow still exists. You already have infrastructure to support artistic, presentations. The fact that what you're presenting doesn't exist yet, different from like a package show that might come into DPAC, for example, or another Roadhouse. That process of discovery, there's still an architectural framework. There's still a guideline of like these principles, these logistical elements that will be a part of that creation process somehow, to some degree, in some form or fashion. And so, long story short, this trajectory of going from like, oh, I want to document how artists are doing this. I'm like, wait, I think what artists are needing, what institutions are needing, what audiences are needing is a practical guideline, a practical guidebook. Here are some key components like, for example, timelines, deadlines, marketing, advertising, and press. They're all three different aspects of engagement. Understanding venues as houses, as buildings of functionality that they were meant to hold, bringing in performance to museums is a prime example of museums as buildings were designed and are maintained to store artwork safely. There are temperature controls, humidity controls, lighting controls. There are time controls in terms of alarms in the building, how with objects that they are storing and have out on view, there's only a certain amount of time that can happen depending on the materials used. Museums were built to support that type of effort. Performance gets excited about museums a lot. They are absolutely stunning spaces more often than not. They have these vast spaces. They have cavernous spaces. There is just like room for this like expansion of imagining how humans are moving through that type of space. It's very fascinating to dancers. When I was working at the Nasher American Dance Festival, being here in Durham, the dancers, when they would walk in, it's a 60,000 square foot like glass pentagon basically, and they would just be in awe. It was like walking into a cathedral for dancers. However, dancers seeking to perform in a space like that, so now you're inviting an audience. The museum are like there's like this inherent constriction that starts to happen, because to imagine movement in a environment that was meant to be stoic and space for reflection, they weren't built to support the other. Now, there's a tremendous amount of room for exploration and ways to successfully manifest that type of collaboration and partnership. But the kind of tipping point, the moment where that becomes a probability of the experience, is when there's an intentionality and a kind of anticipation. There's forethought, there's critical thinking, there's setting the experience up for success. And that's where these guided principles come into play. And I'm just so excited for this book to kind of like, it's literally a birthing. It's like, oh my God, I've got 20 years of experience, and it's like, take it, like I can't contain this anymore. It's a unique experience within the arts, serving as a bridge in this way. I'm not the only person. I think stage managers, you and I have talked a lot about that, production managers, producers, event planners. It's kind of like this, we're the seamstresses behind the scenes in a sense. And so I think ultimately what I'm hoping to do with the book is, start corralling the efforts and naming what goes into this work, because we're not alone out here, artists or producers, both sides. We're not alone.
People talk about the blueprint. Like I said, Jay-Z earlier, one of my favorite artists, has like, he famously has 3 albums called The Blueprint, and he often talks, even on 444, he's like, I'm trying to give you all this information for like $13.99. I'm trying to give you everything. And I think the challenge is I think the older we get, I think about parents, as we are parents. I think about how that, probably the relationship that's changed the most with me from being a parent is my relationship to my parents. I think every time I try to correct my kids, I'm like, damn it. It's just like, I remember when they were trying to, and I thought they were me. I was like, I'm sorry, right? Like, I said I'm sorry to my parents a lot.
Yeah.
But I also think about, like, there are moments that I wasn't ready or receptive of information. I wasn't ready to hear that. Is that a challenge you have often with artists, that they're not ready to hear what will take them to the next step?
I mean, it's happened where, yeah, an artist imagines a vision, and the more we start digging into, inquiring it, putting it under a microscope a little bit, or even just, playing with standing right in front of it a little further back and even further back. And there's been times where it's like, oh, maybe you're not ready, or maybe the timing is not right. And I do my best to not assign judgment, in terms of good or bad, or wrong or right. I think what these moments of sensing something's not ready has kind of reinforced this idea of practice and unfolding, and ultimately longevity. So a lot of what I work on with artists in institutions is getting beyond the idea of the short game, more specifically using the short game to feed your long game.
Which is, I think, it's business. Like, the more I learn about business is understanding how. So, for instance, here's a good example. Proxemic. You have your business, you work, this is yours. You do it full time, it's your thing. Argyle is my thing, but it's part time. It's something I do as a passion project. Mostly because I'm realizing this more so than ever. I haven't, over time, and this is embarrassing to admit, but I haven't done what is required to get to that point. I think so many artists, and that's like level 2 or 3. I say often that when you're a younger artist, you think, wow, creating something, that's the top, that's the summit. That's like, wow, that's the top of Mount Everest. We made it, yeah. And then what you're talking about, longevity, is, yeah, but how do we do the next 12 pieces? Where are they housed? Realizing it might not just be Nasher, it might not just be a place like Deepak. It's a series of venues, it's a tour, it's recordings, it's all of these things. Like, you have to be looking at it this whole way. And I think that's a beautiful thing to teach someone.
Yeah, what I notice is that it starts to kind of alleviate this pressure that working towards a thing is like the only thing that exists. And there's a certain type of like literal anxiety of like the pressure to get this right. And what happens when you imagine the long game and like kind of parallel this idea of envisioning to like the bigger picture, and kind of back up from that of like, okay, so what will it take to achieve that? And like giving yourself these like small ways that like this momentum that can build to that, it starts to alleviate this end all be all literal pressure that we put on ourselves. Right. Of course, that's, I think, a responsibility the sooner we take it, the more we can kind of liberate ourselves to work towards this, ultimate purpose. And gives a career a chance too. I think that's another layer of longevity, is like when you think about the long game, you're already imagining, you're already kind of manifesting it, because if it can become feasible in your mind, you can track towards it.
Do you believe that?
Certainly within degrees. Yeah, I think so. We've talked about this before. I am completely like metaphysical in terms of, I think ultimately my mindset, my mentality, my being, this, idea that everything that is physical is ultimately an energetic vibration. And so, yeah, what is in our imaginations, think about just like dreams we have. We wake up and we're like, did I just do that?
Yeah.
Now we have a connection that is fueled with energy and emotion towards a projected image in our imagination. Like our imaginations are a muscle.
Right.
So yeah, it's totally it's within degrees, because again, context is everything.
Yeah.
I do think there is this reality, truth to being able to create anything we imagine.
I think about Steve Jobs, who's famously has a reality distortion field. It's like something he talks about. He would make up this unbelievable deadline, unrealistic. He would say it as if it was factual, and the people around him had to make this happen, or, face the consequences of not. And as a director, oftentimes, I find myself saying unrealistic things as if they're factual. Because, and like your team around you looks at you like you're crazy and that type of thing. But you have to keep the stern face on. Be like, we can definitely do that. And even if it's not real, you're trying to, I say this often, aim for a star, you might land on a cloud.
Yeah.
So I think we've talked about that before. But it's like, you shoot for as high as you can. And like, but if you don't ever try to get there, then you never get there. And the other part to that, I think, is, I'm a big fan of ChatGPT. I'm a big fan of AI, just because I love the fact it's like, for a artist who's really into business, you can kind of workshop things with this. It talks back to you, allows you. It's almost like a mirror. Like, you can okay, let's work on this. Work on this. Work on this. And what I love now for myself is this graph of understanding a lot of things are possible. Do you have the time for it, and what is that timeline? You mentioned timelines earlier. It's like, okay, you want to make Titanic, great. It might take 20 years for you to make Titanic, unless you have $500 million, and that might spin it faster. But there's like, and I'm a big fan of variables.
Yeah.
My father got his degree in physics. I think he was an engineer. Part of that, I think, came into me. It's like, I really like solving for unknown variables. So I look at, like, that's what we're doing here. And so I guess, to bring this back a little bit, what is probably some of the biggest, what are some of the biggest variables that you were trying to solve with a space? Because you're trying to bring together space, artist, and then community/audience. What are some of the biggest variables for each of those that you're trying to answer?
It totally depends on the project, because determining the variables, again, goes back to the original vision they're looking to,
which leads you to infrastructure. So it's almost like, if we could break this down
these
real
principles.
Quick. Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you is that, okay, it would be really cool if we could open your book and say, we have a 50 person audience. What venue will this work in? It's a dance that requires 4 or 5 dancers. Like, what is this thing that we're working on? And so, like, is that what you're kind of hoping to get to? You can just open this thing up and kind of know where you're going.
Yeah, the book is meant to be able to be valuable no matter what page you turn to. It could be read cover to cover. It could be picked up at, just to review a certain section and then put it back down. It's meant to be used and, dog-tiered and highlighted and notes on the side.
Right.
And I really want it to be an active tool because even for the same artist, each project and endeavor will, in theory, lead to different answers, even using the same questions. And so it's really, there's, each section has kind of like a starting place of inquiries to kind of get the artist's kind of thoughts flowing and exploring in the imagination.
That sounds so scary to me.
It's, it takes listening to what this idea of what you're trying to achieve, what it's asking for. And it sounds bizarre, but the work will speak to you. It will tell you where it wants to go. And the more we trust that and lean into it and practice that active communication, even with our own work, and it is scary, 100%. But so, for example, some of the workshopping where an artist has an idea, they know they want the public to experience it. They know in terms of production resources that probably 50 people would be a good framework. But perhaps they've also envisioned dramatic lighting being very key to this ultimate thing that someone experiences. Okay, well, that already process of elimination really comes into play, and I think determining variables of what a project needs to kind of hone in on or answer the questions of. So, for example, imagining dramatic lighting, you can already knock out outdoor spaces that don't have the lighting, the electricity infrastructure to easily show you what's possible in terms of artistic process. That you can already start to carve away, like, artists, I think, visual artists, that there's a kind of like an approach to creating where, and especially like sculptors, like you're carving out the negative space so that this, what exists in the positive, what remains is what was sculpted, and I think building dances, even music concerts, multi-disciplinary works, there's this process of elimination of defining the negative space that I think we shouldn't sleep on. You start to imagine things that it's definitely not, or not possible, because the amount of resources it would take to, for example, I really see this thing outdoors and I really need this dramatic lighting, and because the way this field is positioned, we're not going to get it with the sunrise or sunset. So we need to bring in this lighting truss and equipment and generator. Oh, it needs to be a silent generator, by the way, to achieve that. And so when you can start to kind of knock away of like what definitely it isn't, it starts to appear.
Like, for me, I'm just like dollar signs.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's like, for instance, like today, we had talked about, we had envisioned going to Merritt's pasture.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this morning, I'm like, I don't want to lug all my crap up there. I worked out a little bit like last night with my daughter, and I was like, man, I'm really out of shape. I'm like, oh, it's gonna be it's an extra hour. It's like, can we do this a different way?
Yes.
Thank you for being obliging, by the way. Appreciate
here
that.
for it. We listen to the process.
Yeah, there we go. Well, that's it. I think also, like, you and I. Well, the next thing I want to talk about real quick here is I want to build. So when I called you a week or so ago, we were at the beach. I came to you because I was like, okay, I'm thinking about getting into like maybe helping artists like do concerts. I have this experience on one side of the ball with production. I was like, I can just help people out. I mean, it's not about making money. It's about helping folks out. What are those conversations that artists or folks talking to venues, like, what do you have? What should you be prepared to answer? Like, what is a, what's a win-win for everyone involved? Like, if you're going, like, if perspective might cut all this, but like, people will call all the time trying to book shows at DPAC, and it's laughable. You're like, no, it's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Like, it's gonna be incredibly expensive. It's
Yeah.
a 3,000 person venue.
Yeah.
You're never gonna sell tickets. It's just not. You're not prepared to pay the staff. You're not prepared for any of this stuff. What should a person, like a novice going to a venue, what is a win-win for that venue? I know it depends on the venue, but just in general.
Yeah, no, I would say the larger the venue, I would offer, be prepared to have that parallel proof of concept. The venue's going to want to know a proof of concept. If you are even to only have dates. Because why?
Sorry, that's hilarious, but it's true.
Because you can have all the resources in the world and book DPAC. 3,000 seat venue. Nationally acclaimed space.
Number 3 and number 5 in the poll. Happens often. Nothing to brag about. You've been there before.
Yes. It's you can do that all day, but even for a venue, you taking dates, even if you're paying for them, removes the opportunity for them to use those dates in a way that may be either more profitable or more aligned with their mission and the communities they serve. Beyond proof of concept in terms of, like, have you done this before? What was that experience? What yielded, in the results? Some type of display of capacity for planning something like this or creating something for that venue. They're going to want to know that, but also more so, and I think if the venue is smart, they're practicing these things, venues are ran by humans. Let's not elevate them too high in terms of, like these beacons of the only thing to work towards. It's not the case. But this other element of, are you speaking to their audiences? So venues have operational budgets. They have their own mission statements. They exist within their own communities. And so therefore exist to serve particular artists or audiences, hopefully artists too, that they have intentionally set out to serve. They aim to do that through XYZ programming or XYZ presentations. Rental programs, believe it or not, I think should have a similar approach of alignment. And so as artists with ideas or even producers with ideas to, help more things happen or a specific idea happen, I think the venues you imagine imagining how it connects to their audiences, and it requires doing homework. Know who you're speaking to. Know why you want to work with them and at their venue. Go beyond the, like, I just love this space. Because if they are not serving audiences that you wish to serve, again, here we are back at attempting to shove this square peg in a round hole of, like, they won't let me do this thing because that means you're going to bringing in this thing that they work very actively to not participate in.
It's really funny.
Whatever, that manifestation is.
One of my favorite quotes of all time is from Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Very quick read. I recommend everyone read it at least once a year.
Quick.
It's like 90 pages. It's quicker than most, right? Or the Audible, man.
Yeah.
Put that on while you're doing the dishes. Which is the
Right.
first time I did it. It was like 4 a.m. in the morning, and I'm like, oh my, the amount of game I'm getting out of this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Anyway, know your enemy, know yourself. It's probably one of my and what's hitting with me is that, like, do your homework, know what you're trying to do, know who they serve. This might be a bad relationship.
Yeah.
I equate so much to dating. Like,
Yes.
honestly, it's like just almost like, you know, you might think this person's attractive, but like, are they anywhere? Like, are they like you at all? Do they have the same value set?
Do you value the same things and or anything similar?
Yeah.
You know, opposites attract too, but like.
But also, listen, I got a wife again who's a stage manager who's like, we're very different, and thank God, 13 years of love. But like, it's just like it takes effort.
Yeah.
And it's also challenging. Most of us are trying to do something.
Yes.
Very quick. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also going back to something you said earlier. Timeline. What is your timeline? Mm-hmm. Look at their website. Crucial. Check out what they have going on. Mm-hmm. Know your dates. Understand all that to me. Look so
at the
true.
Past few years.
Yeah.
You know, because what you might be imagining bringing something to them that's like innovative and groundbreaking, they may have been dabbling in for the past few years.
But I think one thing I've learned to kind of shift this a little bit, something I'm recently getting into, which is learning that you got to know who you're partnering with, because what success is to them, what their expectation is. Mm-hmm. I recently had this conversation with working with a broadcast station, mm-hmm. and I was having this conversation. It was these are successful folks who have made lots of money, who are doing this stuff, and you know, I'm having this conversation. I'm like, I don't know if this is, even financially, if this is a win. I'm like, I don't know if this is like what Rebel is about. Because I like doing things my own way. You might have a $500,000 budget, and it might look beautiful or whatever, but I'm like, I don't think that's necessarily what gets me going in the morning.
And that's the homework, that the active listening of the work speaking that you're listening to.
Yeah.
That you are taking time to assess. I think assessment, analytics, analyzing.
Thank God for that breeze.
Yeah,
it's getting hot out
here,
folks.
It's starting to like. But you know, maybe it's a good moment to kind of like wrap in terms of like reflection, the value we can gain in reflection, and that reflection ultimately being a tool for comparison of that original idea of first inspecting purpose, mm-hmm. and why and what is it for. Because when you're reflecting, you can assess, wait, okay, so financially this budget was where it's at, but like the work itself and my degree of agency and the way I am actively working towards this broader, you know, bigger picture, that didn't align. Okay, what is that? What about it didn't align? And now you can kind of dig into that, but you've got this framework to keep it manageable and digestible. And maybe this is also like the foreshadowing to the sequel, because I think there's this, you know, that room for adjustment, you know, like where we get to explore playing with like, what didn't work? Oh, let's try it next time. Let's try it this way. And
Absolutely.
Sometimes it may mean changing partners,
mm-hmm.
but I think similar, you know, like my parents' kind of like wisdom, you know, I keep coming to as a parent is when we seek to change our circumstances, when we seek to change our partners, seek to change our jobs, seek to change you know, someone we're working with, and don't change ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Or at least look at ourselves. Introspection is a very large part of reflection. If we're not including that in the investigation, you know, in this assessing and reflecting, we're doing a huge disservice, because then what is preventing you from just manifesting the same exact, you know,
different day, same story. You know, like different
yeah.
characters, same plot.
I think about like I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot about Inside Out too.
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
Not yet.
Yeah, like so.
But I love Inside Out though. It's amazing.
I have a love-hate relationship. First time I saw it, I hated it. Mostly because the only feeling I care about is rage. So I'm like, what is all this other garbage?
Yeah.
But my wife saw Inside Out too with the kids, and like my wife and my daughter both suffer from anxiety, and like that's a big play in this movie. And like my wife's like this is way too real. It's like really hitting me. It's just like causing all types of stuff. That's why we all have therapists. But anyway, but it's just.
It's a maintenance.
Oh my God! It's
so good.
If you don't have a therapist, highly. Oh my God!
Find two.
It's the best.
Yes.
But I think this conversation about self, you have to know something I tell everyone all the time. It's a reference to Batman. Batman Begins. Bruce Wayne is fighting this guy on ice or training, and he finally gets the guy down. It's like a sword fight at him. And the guy's like, "Well, yeah, you got this, but you sacrifice your footing." And the guy just hits the ice, and the ice cracks. And it's this lesson of like, if you don't understand where you are, if you don't understand what you're doing, if you don't understand what got you there, you're gonna sacrifice something.
Yeah.
I love playing chess. I'm a horrible chess player because I get really bored. And so eventually I'm like, yeah, go for it. And you can't be successful that way. You can't just like throw everyone out there. There's a patience, and I think a everyday check-in list with yourself.
Yeah.
And I can go back to what we were talking about earlier. It's this idea of like, time on that. Idea that like you have to be. I think it's what you're talking about in your book too. You have to be communicating and at peace with every single marker. You think about like, you and I grew up in a time where people were still kind of going to space, and like there's countdowns. Everyone's checking up stuff. You have to do the same thing with art. Same thing. Everyone needs to be on board. They might not all be doing the same thing, which I think another problem we get into. We think, my buddy Frank was talking about earlier. It's like people, the marketing thinks marketing's everything. Production thinks production's everything. Other departments think ticketing thinks everyone thinks what they're doing is paramount, but you all have to work in tandem.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of what you're getting at. I even think the sequel that is of analysis and it's taking stock, because you can't ever move forward without looking at the successes and the failures and understanding both.
Yeah. And the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So that's
huge.
what I think, imagining the creation process, working towards bringing something to the public, is understanding the ecosystem that goes into creating that. And we're not alone out here, even when we're performing solo works.
Yeah.
It's not a solo team that brings that all together. And the more we encourage our collaborators or our team and ourselves to really do that inventory of what they're bringing to the table, what they cannot bring to the table, and naming these things. And the more that these kind of collaborative teams have those conversations sooner rather than later, I just think the better, the more smoother. It doesn't have to be that frustrating, with communication, with a little anticipation of time, and like coming together to really work towards the same goals. Ultimately, it's we're going to have different iterations of how what we bring to the table gets us there, but it's that we're all moving towards the same vision, and taking that time to communicate that vision as soon as possible, in a process, because what else is all of this for if we don't know what we're headed towards?
I think that's the question. And I think that's the question you have to start out with, which is, what is all this for? It's like you said, it's like, why are you doing this? Simon Sinek wrote that really good book, starts with why. But I think, again, we're in it with this, I think that is literally part of your journey. So last question I'm going to ask you We don't have to talk about anything else you want to talk about, but like from the last conversation we had in 2020 to now, how have you most changed when it comes to what you're doing? Got a haircut. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I got a haircut. Yeah. I think what's changed for me since 2020 is the trust that I have in myself. And I think that's a huge kind of lifetime achievement, you know. I mean, that in itself is a practice, trust. But and trusting more because I'm clarifying more. Giving myself the time and space and my nervous system. Let's be real about that. Giving my nervous system the time and space to imagine a larger vision, you know, kind of a larger vision from this place. Giving myself and my nervous system the time and space to reflect on and listen to what, you know, the acceleration the world was going in just before the pandemic shut everything down. We were accelerating at like wild paces.
I feel like we're back
We
to that,
are
though.
doing that again, and I think that's why I feel this kind of immediacy to get out the book, because
we're worse now than we were before.
It's like we forgot intentionality again.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to do that because we're just trying to maintain. We are, you know, just trying to get from one project to the next as successfully as we can, with as little energy as possible. The variables are plentiful and plenty of stressful too.
Yeah.
But working against capitalism to pause and essentially regain the agency to choose where your energy goes. And I think that's kind of like a primary vehicle, you know, that's been what's different for me in the past few years, is that agency to choose where my energy goes. If it's not serving this ultimate purpose to help artists and audiences, artists and institutions, artists and resources, if it's not in that ultimate direction, you know, I've got to choose something different. And that, again, this is all a practice. There's no kind of like moment of perfection, but there are moments of alignment, and seeking alignment, I think, is entrusting that I can find it, you know, that I can provide it, that alignment. I think that's the kind of like biggest anchor since the pandemic.
I love that. I think, tell you mine, it's realizing, it's funny because capitalism is a big part of mine.
Yeah.
It's realizing that what I want and hope for probably yields much smaller, possibly, or takes much more time. But what I gained from that, what I'm understanding, which I think I knew when I was 17 and 18, I'm just coming back to, was that control is my most valued commodity. I have to own it. If I don't own it, I'm not a part of that conversation. You know, working with Shali often, they'd say, you know, nothing about us without us.
Yes.
And I think really and truly, if it's not of me, then I don't really want to be a part of it. I mean, I can help, I can love you, I can do everything in the world to be there, but it's also not mine. And so if it's not mine, if this train is not mine, a 38. It's a short one. It's
Yeah.
yeah, but if it's not mine, then it's not Argyle Rebel.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not Argyle Rebel, it could be something else. I'm totally cool with that. Totally, but like it's just, I think I'm just really realizing like, and I think what I'm trying to do with people is give them that thing that they can own.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, let me help you get there. Let me help you with like the blueprint. Let me help you with this stuff. Like do this, do that. But to that own self be true is like the most important motherfucking thing to me,
Yeah.
I think. I don't know.
I mean, because serving from an empty place is nothing to give, So I think it's to clarify and define, even for one particular project or venture, is okay. There's still limitless possibilities for how that manifests.
Yeah.
But clarify what it is and what it isn't. That's okay to do.
Yeah.
And I think there's kind of generally speaking, at least, in the past, let's call it 100 years, and the arts in America is like, it's okay to define.
If you don't define, you fail. You're probably going to fail.
You don't know. It's harder to recognize when you've been successful because you don't know what you were out for to begin with.
I love that. It's harder. Yeah, it's harder to recognize success, that's so true. I mean, like, we often call something a failure, but really we're just not recognizing what we did succeed at.
Correct.
I mean, I think there's...
there's misses.
Yeah. Yeah,
sure.
There's definitely misses. And I also think there's just like... Yeah, I think misses is the way you're saying it. It just didn't go as planned. It wasn't what you wanted it to be. Something slipped. A miss, I think it's most
a mistake.
Yeah, a mistake.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I just, it's an opportunity to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And but I do think, well, you said earlier, we're just chatting now, but I do think something that it is, what were you trying to accomplish? And quite frankly, were you at the start line?
Yeah.
Because this might have been lap 1 of 4. Like,
right.
You weren't ready. You weren't even warmed up. And
you
tried to go out there, and you failed because it wasn't it, my friend. It was like you didn't practice enough.
Is it right? You're getting there,
Yeah.
And even for you as like a producer and let's say artist.
Sure.
You understanding what Argyle Rebel is and needs, and like what you were just mentioning of like, being there from the jump, and it's like, having control, not for the sake of it, but for the alignment of it. That's Rebel, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You may choose to have some other project or initiative or company or whatever that is all about jumping in where anybody needs any part of the process. I don't own it. It's not mine. It's not control. And that's what that is. But it's not what this is. And this, to have that clarified in that definition and that kind of like stance, it speaks clarity, and people will understand how to communicate with that. But when we're kind of like, when projects and visions are kind of like this amoeba where you can't say whether or not you envision this at the beach or atop of a mountain, know if you need the sea salt. Know if you need
snowshoes.
The snowshoes. And it sounds so simple, but that type of clarification speaks. And that's what we're trying to do out here. Right?
I love that. Anything else you wanted that we didn't hit?
I don't think so.
You got it? That was a hot one. Thanks for that.
Good. I know. You're like now in the spotlight.
I'm like 100% in the spotlight. Luckily, I'm darker than you, so that probably works out for the camera. That was awesome, man.
That was so good. That felt really, really nice.